Today we're gonna do the long-awaited retrograde video coming up in just a moment. Hey everybody, I'm Mel. I'm the owner here of Melsdivination, and it is Witchy Wednesday. And on Witchy Wednesdays, we do witchcraft, we do astrology, we do energy, we do all sorts of things that fall under that umbrella that affect our lives as spiritual witchcraft practitioners. Today we're going to talk about planetary retrogrades, okay? So if you're not into astrology, this might be a video you want to skip. It's going to get a little bit detailed and in-depth, but it's more for like the intro or the beginner about retrograde energy. Now, if you've been following the channel for a while, you'll know that I had started a series over the summertime in 2022 of sharing the weekly updated astrology of what's coming in the next week. And then I do it also with the month as well. We focus on moon energy, also new moon and full moon every month on top of that. And because of some of those energies, we've been talking a little bit more about planetary retrogrades, because as I'm filming this right now, we have all the planets are direct right now. I'm filming this in February 2023. It's mid-February, almost the end of February 2023. And we are still coming out of a Mars retrograde shadow period energy, but when we talk about that stuff, that gets kind of confused and convoluted when I'm talking about it in the live videos. So I wanted to do just an intro to retrograde energy video. Now I do have my notes right underneath me if you don't know, so I'm going to be looking down because I do want to stay focused. I do want to make this very concise and clear so it's not overwhelming, especially for those of you who are fairly new to the astrology world. So first of all, planetary retrogrades, they talk about what looks like apparent backward motion of a planet with its orbit from Earth. So what does that mean? If you go back to like science in, I don't know, 4th and 5th grade, we learned that in our solar system, the planets rotate, they orbit around the sun, and the Earth is the third planet away from the sun. Now, every planet has its own rotation, and retrograde is the concept that another planet, not Earth, another planet, Mercury, Mars, Venus, all of the other planets in the solar system are moving backwards compared to Earth. They're not actually moving backwards. It's the way that the way that it looks because of the way that the orbits are affecting each other, okay? So it has to do with orbital speeds and distances of planets and that kind of thing. There's a lot of scientific geometry to that. We're not going to get into super depth about that. It's just something that I wanted to let you all know because you may have heard this before. It appears to be moving backwards in the sky, even though it's actually moving in its normal direction. So no planets actually stop and go backwards. No, it's just more like how does it look compared to the Earth, okay? So that's point number one. Number two, in astrology, retrograde periods are believed to have significant effects on the energy of the planet and the areas of life it governs. Now, if you're not familiar, every single planet has its own energy, has its own effect on us as individuals, but also as humanity and the world, okay? That's basically the concept of astrology in a nutshell. So when there's a retrograde, it has to do with each individual planet and not like the whole picture. Retrogrades are commonly associated with delays. Now this is all retrogrades. So we're talking about Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Neptune, Saturn, Pluto, Uranus, and some of the asteroids, because there's also Chiron that can retrograde, but we're not going to get into that right now. Now, all retrogrades generally come across with qualities of delays, confusion, introspection, which means looking within, and opportunities to reflect and reevaluate. I always say anything that starts with the beginning of the prefix re, is a good thing to focus on during a retrograde energy. It just depends on the energy of each individual planet of what you would specifically focus on. Now, before we get into the breakdown of each planet, I did want to talk about one more general idea around all the planets of retrograde. And this is something called the shadow period. I'm going to try to keep it concise, but this part might get confusing. So if you do get confused and you have questions, feel free to comment down below. Also, I'm not an astrologer, and I completely forgot to tell you all that. I'm learning, I'm growing, I know the basics, I know more than the basics. I'm more of an intermediate at this point, but I am a student of astrology, and I like to share my information with you guys because it helps me. If I can teach it, I understand it. So it helps me learn more, okay? So definitely use other resources. Please don't make me your end-all be-all, or any influencer for that matter, okay? Now, shadow period. When a planet, I should have drawn this out for you guys. You know what? I'm going to draw it out. Okay, we're going to do a visual comparison for you guys. Now, because this is mirrored, I had to draw it with just lines and not with words, but that's okay. If you pay attention, you're going to understand it. All right, so picture this as the retrograde cycle. Now, this applies again to every single planet in our solar system. Before I explain what this is, you need to understand the concept that every part of our astrology, every zodiac sign, has numbers in them called degrees. It's basically a placement. So if Mars is in Gemini at 12 degrees, that is a placement of where it's at. It's a way to tick off like where the location is. Every zodiac sign has 29 degrees, 0 to 29 degrees in it, okay? And that doesn't really matter too much. You just need to kind of understand that there are numbers involved. Now, when a planet is getting ready to go retrograde, let's say Mercury, for example, because it's the easiest one and everybody knows about Mercury retrograde, there is 2 shadow periods. There's the before, and then there's the middle of the retrograde, and then there's the after. Okay, what does this mean? What it means is, so let's say Mercury is in Aquarius and it's at 2 degrees. Now it's getting ready to go retrograde. So it's starting to slow down. It's slowing down. It's slowing down. It's slowing down. It's not actually changing positions like I already said, but it looks like it's slowing down and it feels like it's slowing down. It's slowing down. Now remember here, it started at 2 degrees Aquarius. Now it's going backwards. Now it's in mid retrograde. And it's different. The timing is different for every planet, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So just focus on the main concept here instead of like, well, how long is it? Don't worry about how long. All right. So then it's in the main retrograde. And then it comes out of retrograde, and now it's a post shadow. So now it's slowly speeding up, slowly speeding up, slowly speeding up. And when it is fully out of its shadow period, it ends up, as you see, this line is connected, this little arch is connected, because this is 2 degrees Aquarius, this is 2 degrees Aquarius. So it is not considered out of its retrograde period until it gets back to where it started, okay? So even though in this middle, this is the only technical part of retrograde, this part is still considered shadow period after retrograde, and this is where a lot of people get confused. So if Mercury comes out of retrograde on the 6th of January, let's say, everybody's like, oh, we're out of it. No, we're not. We are still in the shadow period until it gets back to where it started. So we will still feel that energy. For instance, right now, Mars came out of retrograde in January. It is February right now. We are still in Mars retrograde shadow period. It's not back to the start yet. It won't be fully out of its shadow period until March 16th. So every planet has a different amount of, and this is why I didn't want you to focus on the dates or the timing or how long, because Mercury and Mars, their orbits are different. So Mercury moves faster than Mars does. So it's retrograde period. It's shadow period. Those are going to be shorter. Mars are going to be longer. So don't get hung up on how long each one is. It's more about understanding what is shadow. What is a shadow period? What does that mean? It means when it's starting to go retrograde, it's getting ready to go retrograde, it starts slowing down. And where it starts slowing down is where it's going to take time before it comes all the way back around. And that's what's really important to remember. We won't fully get out of that energy until it gets back to the beginning, until it cycles back to the start, okay? And that's where a lot of people get confused. One last thought on the shadow phase energy. As it's getting really close, when it's slowing down in the shadow phase and it's getting super close to go retrograde, and then as it's getting ready to come out of retrograde, there's a little window on each end that for Mercury, I can tell you it's like 4 or 5 days for each of them. And it starts during shadow and it ends during the retrograde, that the energy is extremely magnified. And that's because the planet is shifting at that time. As the planet is actually shifting direct or retrograde, it magnifies the energy on each window. That's when it's the most intense. So I hope that made sense. If I lost you, feel free to comment down below and I will try my best to type out a better explanation. Moving forward, okay, so we're past the shadow explanation. Moving forward, we're going to talk about what's considered the inner planets. So Mercury, Venus, and Mars, okay? The retrogrades of the inner planets are particularly significant in astrological interpretations because they occur more frequently. So those planets, they go retrograde more often and are considered to have more of a direct impact on our individual everyday lives. So we're going to go over a brief overview of the retrograde planets, the inner ones, the ones I just mentioned, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. What does this look like? Well, you probably have some familiarity at this point with Mercury retrograde, but I'm going to go over it at least a little bit anyways. Mercury retrogrades 3 to 4 times per year. Again, that depends on its cycle of each year, but the minimum is 3, the maximum is 4, typically. The actual retrograde part lasts about 3 weeks. But as you all probably know, it's more of a 6 or 7 week window because it's when it's starting, when it's in the middle, and then when it's coming out, okay? So although the actual retrograde chunk is 3 weeks, we feel it way longer than that. And that's the part that a lot of people get confused on, and that's the part that's really important as far as knowing your energies and what you're up against and what you need to work with or against, okay? During Mercury retrograde, it's a time for when communication, travel, and technology can become disrupted. This can lead to misunderstandings, delays, technical glitches. It's also a time for introspection and reevaluation of plans and ideas. And that's because Mercury is of the mind. Mercury is of the communication. It's thoughts and it's words. Thoughts and words, okay? So anything connected to thoughts and words is going to be affected by the Mercury retrograde, all right? So this is just general. It's not focused specifically on what zodiac signs or anything like that. So it would look different every time, and we'll talk about that at the end. Next, Venus retrograde. Venus retrogrades once about every 18 months. So it doesn't move as quickly as Mercury does. When it retrogrades, again, in the middle, we're not talking about the shadow part. When it retrogrades, it's about 6 weeks. So think of that umbrella, think of that arch. It's significantly more than 6 weeks. There's the before and the after. This is a time when relationships, finances, and personal values may be reevaluated. It's what does the planet rule? Venus rules love, relationships, money, beauty, and what we value, okay? It's a time for reflection and possibly reconnecting with old friends or partners. Also, when Mercury is in retrograde, a lot of people come back. a lot of people from the past come back, and it doesn't always mean that that's a good thing. And maybe I'll do a full Mercury retrograde video because that one's a separate, that's a bit longer. If you want me to do a Mercury retrograde video, comment down below and I will, okay? I'm not going to do it if you guys don't want it. Mars retrograde is next. Mars retrogrades once every 2 years, which is why when it happens, it's more extreme. We're retrograde. We just came out of a retrograde energy with Mars. We're not fully out of it, like I said, and we're not going to have this again for 2 more years. We're in the clear for that for 2 years, all right? It says it lasts about 2 months. Now, we know it doesn't because of the shadow period. If you've been following me for a while, Mars retrograde started in October and we're still not out of it. And we're in February. That's more than 2 months. Let's be real. We won't be out of it until the middle of March. So when Mars is in retrograde, generally, it's a time when energy, motivation, and assertiveness may be diminished. You guys might be feeling low. There's also, I don't have it in here, but generally you may even feel lackluster physically. So yeah, it talks about energy and motivation, but also sexuality. You might not really be feeling into that. You might be feeling like low libido, low interest in sexuality at this time because Mars rules the action of the male sexuality. Now, we all have that in ourselves because that's what drives us, that sexual drive. So if you do feel that way, or if you have been feeling that way, don't worry, there's nothing wrong with you. It is literally the energy and you're feeling it for the time being. It will come, and start tracking things if you notice that. Conflicts could also arise, the irritation as well. It is a time for reflection and strategizing before taking action. So think of like masculinity in a positive way. Masculinity is an energy of do. I'm doing. I'm the leader. I'm the actor. Now, I'm not getting into gender roles and all that. I'm talking about traditional masculine, feminine energy, okay? Now, let's talk about the outer planets. The outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, okay? They're generally less frequent and have a longer duration, so they last longer, and it's because these planets move significantly slower. The outer planets are big, they're large, and their energy is slower moving than the inner planets. We feel the inner planets like a lot. The outer planets, sometimes we feel them, not as frequently. So the outer planets, the retrogrades are considered to be more of a collective or societal impact and are often associated with transformation, restructuring, and upheaval. There's been a lot going on with Pluto and changes as far as our society and what's been going on for the past 3 years plus with all of the illness and stuff like that. So that does, if you track the astrology, it does connect to some of the astrology. Now, I do want to be clear, these planets do not cause things, but they make the energy ripe for it to turn into something, okay? Now, to wrap this up, as we have discussed in many other videos, there's a lot more to just these basics. This is like we're just skimming the top with retrograde stuff, okay? The energy of each planetary retrograde is unique every single time, but it does share some similarities as we just talked about. Each planet has its own individual retrograde energy, but then on top of it, there's more factors, and we're going to talk about those right now. Without getting too technical, some of the other factors that affect the retrograde energies are: what zodiac sign does it take place in? For instance, Mars was in Gemini. What house it takes place in for you personally, and how is that going to affect you personally? If you had that planet in retrograde when you were born, that will look different than if you didn't, all right? What other astrological aspects is this situation specifically triggering for the moment, in the moment? Other specific planets, for instance, is there a square between Mars and, I don't know, Neptune? Is there a square between Mars and the sun? That kind of stuff will affect the retrograde. So every time a planet goes retrograde, yeah, it has a general theme of the same, but it's going to be different depending all the other stuff that's going on around that specific planet. Because remember, we have multiple things in the skies. We don't just have one planet that's standing all alone. For instance, we had Mars retrograde in Gemini. I'm using that one a lot. I'm sorry. It's because we're still kind of in it and we've talked about it a lot recently, and it's a lot easier to use an example that is happening right now than it is to try to find one and make it up. So Mars retrograde was in Gemini, is in Gemini. This had typical Mars retrograde energy with that assertion, that aggravation, that low energy vibe. But because of the Gemini placement during this time, we also ended up having energy that was similar to Mercury retrograde because Gemini rules communication. So it messed with communication the way it would happen if Mercury was in retrograde. Then on top of that, while Mars was in retrograde, Mercury went into retrograde. And Uranus was in retrograde. All of that was happening at the same time. They are all factors. One planet and one aspect does not stand alone ever. Everything is doing something in the sky. Everything is connected somehow in some way in the sky. So like I said, it's not just, oh, well, Mars is in retrograde in Gemini and that's it. It never is like that, ever. It's important to note that while retrograde periods can be challenging, they can also be opportunities for growth and transformation, slowing down. It's a slowdown because it's natural. Think of it like the rhythms of the seasons on the planet, or the rhythms of even the sun and the moon, where things go quiet and it's rest and inner sanctity and slowing things down in a place of peace and reviewing. There's a reason for that. That's very natural. It's nature. Planets are nature. That is natural. So it's something that's happening because it's meant to, because we're supposed to take that energy and work with it. By being aware of the retrogrades and their potential effects, we can use these periods to reflect, reevaluate, and make positive changes in our lives. And we can use that energy to help ourselves, to work towards something. For instance, when Mercury is in retrograde, you can prep all you want. You can plan ahead, you can do backup things, you can have extra plans, but you still might break down on the side of a highway. It can happen. It does happen. The point is to prep as much as you can ahead of time, knowing the energy that's going to be coming in, so that when it does come, you're prepared for it. And it's more, you can go with the flow and you don't feel like you're a victim of circumstance, because you're really not. You're really not. Like, the universe is not out to get you. The planets don't hate you. It's energy that forces us to stop and think, okay? I hope that helps you guys. Feel free, if you got lost in this, comment down below asking questions, because I do read them and I will answer as best as I can, or maybe somebody else can who's in the community, because other people know things. If I messed anything up, I don't think I did, but if I did, feel free to give me constructive feedback. I love that and I appreciate it, because like I said, I am still learning as well. Be kind to each other. Check out some of the other videos, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.